Let's move over to talking about the Van Halen stuff a little bit. So when do you get the call from Alex Van Halen to paint some kits or go on the road with them?
I painted some stuff for him early 90s when I was still with Kick Tracy. I knew his drum tech at the time, Rob Kern, and he called me to paint some drum heads and paint some congas and miscellaneous stuff. Because Al never really had like the custom painted kits per se. He had the crazy setups and a lot of creative, unique things with it, but it wasn't so much like artwork painted on the shells that I was known for. But
Right.
I did do drum heads for him, and I painted a few odds and ends for him. And really, when his drum tech Rob wanted to move into production, Al was like, "Well, find me a drum tech to replace you." And so Rob thought of me and called me up, and I was kind of like, yikes, because this was like my hero, and the mighty Van Halen, but of course I said absolutely, because I want to sit behind that guy every night, and also his brother,
Yeah.
so I jumped on that. That was the tail end of '97. Um, and it was also another pleasant experience in that um, both Edward and Alex are great guys and great work ethic. I still never seen any work ethic like the Van Halen brothers, and they respected their talents and their craft of drums and guitar and making music and putting on a great rock show. And um, that never waned. Those guys were just so passionate
Mhm.
about the music and their instruments, and I loved being around that.
Right.
Love it.
It must have been incredibly like inspiring as well to be not only working with your, I'm almost like idols at that point. I mean, like being a fan as
Absolutely.
well. Like it must have been just super inspirational to be like, you know what, if these guys are giving it their all, like there's no reason for me to not want to give it my all as well. Cause it's almost like you have something to prove to them.
Yeah, and it's a lot because they demand a lot.
Mm.
Uh,
What do you mean by
but
that though? Like, what do they demand from you?
well, I mean, they because they're passionate about the music and their craft, they have high standards of what, like when Al sits at his kit, it needs to be just like he wants it, and the sound and the lights, and they pay attention to all of it. And so that kind of uh, passion filters down through everybody that's involved,
Right.
and I just have a lot of respect for that, and it makes you try harder, because they expect more, and rightfully so.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I'm happy to give it my all to somebody that gives it his all at the drums, or whatever. And at the end of the night, they say thank you, and that's we do it again the next day in the next city.
Did you ever have conversations with Al about his old kits back in the day? I mean, like why he had such big drum kits compared to other drummers of the time?
Not that question specifically, but I mean, to me, that was just all part of everything. Was Van Halen was excessive. The amount of speakers on the stage, the amount of lights in the sky, the amount of drums on the stage. Everything was excessive. It was, I've certainly asked him about specific things about recording, or what he used on this song or whatever. And his statements are usually like, I don't know, man. We were just in there making music and having a
And
good
do you think
time,
that is
drinking
that true
beer.
though? Like, do you think that's true? Like, he had no idea what he was doing, like how he tuned his snare, or like he wasn't a gear
Well,
guy
I
at
mean,
all, like his brother.
he was a tone chaser for sure. I mean, and he, you mentioned his snare, because that is arguably one of the few signature sounding drummers of our time. That's a very difficult thing to do, to
Yes.
have a very identifiable drum sound.
You put on
And it's not,
Intruder or Pretty Woman, and it's like you know who is
yeah,
playing that drum kit.
yeah. And look, I get that email all the time. That question of like, what's the key to the Alex Van Halen drum sound? Blah 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 blah. And I have a pre-written thing. I get it so much that I just copy and paste because
Yes. The automatic
the
reply.
key.
As soon as it says Alex
Yeah.
Van Halen, just automatic reply.
Yeah. The key is Alex Van Halen, because in my time with him, he's played every snare drum under the sun. Maple, brass, hammered bronze, aluminum, steel, carbon fiber, blah blah blah, every single one, all different types of drum heads, and they all sound like him, you know. And when I played his drums, guess what? It sounded like me.
Yeah.
Now,
well, that's what everybody says about Eddie's, rig. I mean,
it's true. It's true. I mean, it's that way with all guitar players. I've seen it. Look, I just did a summer tour with Billy Gibbons, in Europe, and it's like he can play pretty much anything. Once he puts his fingers on that guitar neck, that's the sound.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what he's playing through. Doesn't matter what pedal he steps on it. And now they all have their thing. Edward Van Halen certainly had his thing, and obviously was instrumental in developing lots of cool guitars and effects and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, it's in his touch and in his DNA, and it's the same with Al on the drum sound. Now there's a particular tuning that he wants to hear from that drum, just like Ed's guitar was tuned, but it's in their DNA.
Right. Hold on.
Yep.
I have something here, something really fun. This is the John Douglas signature snare. I mean, the Alex Van Halen signature snare.
Yeah, Alex Van Halen. Yeah.
But talk a little bit about the. Oh yeah, I actually had two at one point. I had one that I wanted to play, and I had one that just sat in the box, and I got rid of the other one because it just sat in the box. But I took the Van Halen head off on it. But I have an LM402 that I customized with the tube lugs and the Millennium throw off and everything, so I had like a mirror of it. But talk a little bit about this snare. I mean, like, what was it about the metal Ludwig snares that Al gravitated towards, like on those last couple of tours when he was like a Rosewood guy for so long?
Yeah, Rosewood guy. Yeah, I know. But in the early days, it was when I started with him, he was playing a hammered bronze, super sensitive Ludwig snare drum when I started with him. And they moved on to everything.
Did it have all the taping and the muffling on it and everything?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. And I put like a carburetor spring on the throw off so that it wouldn't fall off during the show, because it had a tendency to do that. And yeah, we were doing the gaff tape on the Ludwig silver dot underneath the head. Yep. When I started, we were doing all that. And then you crank it. But that drum in particular started here at my house. I had an old Ludwig Superphonic chrome drum, was all scratched up, great sounding drum. And I looked into getting it replated, and it's expensive. Chrome plating is expensive. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that. So because I can't stop myself from
being an artist,
modifying stuff, I can't leave anything stock. So I had this drum, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to take a grinder to it and remove the chrome. So I literally just held the drum, and I held a grinder, and with a sanding disc. I knew enough not to use a grinding disc because the metal's real thin. And I just by hand, I removed everything, leaving the bead, because I didn't, I knew that it would probably damage the bead trying to remove that chrome. So I just removed and got all the swirl, all that cool, swirly ground metal look on this drum. And I liked the way it looked, and I put it back together. Still sounded great. So fast forward, I don't know when, a year or two or something like that, Van Halen was about to do A Different Kind of Truth, the next record with Dave. And so I was talking to Al, still here in Texas. Al says, well, do you have any interesting snare drums there at your house? And I said, yeah, I got a few. I had a Tama Art Star 2 that with the inside had a layer of carbon fibers, kind of a rare drum. Yeah, factory. Yeah. I had that. I had a fiberglass Tempest from Canada that was a good sounding drum. And I had, and he said, well, bring all those when we go into the studio.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had, I think a case for, with 4 slots in it, and I had 3 different ones. So I thought, okay, I'm going to throw that Ludwig drum in there because I knew it was a good sounding drum, even though he's got a million of them, you know, of the 402 or whatever. He's got a ton of them, but I put it in the slot. We shipped it to California. And then, so we're in the studio and, auditioning snare drums, and he, you know, kept putting it up there, and it was unanimous. Ed and Al liked the sound of this particular drum that I did.
Wow.
And so he recorded the whole record on that. And then the tour following that, he played it. And then, you know, photos started getting out and what's the story on that drum. In the meantime, Ludwig's talking about doing a signature drum and snare drum, another one, you know, and I pitched like the black and white stripes from Fair Warning, you know,
like you have behind you there.
Yeah. And, you know, cause I thought that to me, that's the iconic one of the, he's got many iconic hits, but for me, that's kind of the one. And so I even did a prototype, you know, I painted a Ludwig snare drum with those black and white stripes, and I forget why, but I threw a bunch of ideas at him, and we kind of kept coming back to this drum. And so that became, anyway, that's a long-winded story to where that
and it became from. I love the fact that, first of all, I mean, like he's Alex Van Halen and he has a specific tone just like his brother, but the fact that he had to audition snare drums for the record, like you'd think he'd have his go-to at that point, like, you know.
Well, I think that's pretty common. I don't know, but like I said, they're tone chasers and stuff. So yeah. You know, you're in a different room, and you know, every day, Al used to have this thing when he would sit at the kit on tour or whatever. He'd sit down and, you know, especially on tour, and he'd sit at sound check and he'd hit the drum and he'd kind of look at me. And I think I think back and I think he was totally winding me up, but he would sit there and play it and he'd go, what's different? And I was like, everything. You know, we're in a different city, in a different building. It's a different day. It's like everything is different. You know, so you're different. I'm different. I mean, what do you mean? I think at the time I took it really serious. Like, you know, but I think he was winding me up. But to your point, you know, I mean, in the studio, it's a different. We weren't at 5150. You know, it was a totally different studio, so that's unusual for them. And
was that at Henson?
So, yes, yeah. So, you know, they just put up some drums, and that was the one that they settled on. You know, even though Al kept saying, you know, I want a nice wooden sound, so we put up all the, you know, his signature rosewood and Atama rosewood, and that was the drum that got picked. You know, so.
Yeah, it's funny, like listening to I was front row in 2012. Van Halen's the one band. Van Halen and Def Leppard and Shania Twain are the 3 bands that I've like spared no expense for. Like I've always saved up to like get like the front row tickets and the VIP and everything, and I'd always go sit in front row. Like in 2012 and 2015, I sat front row, and then I'd go to another show and I'd sit further back in front of the house because I wanted to hear the mix as like best as possible. And
right.
And it's funny, like on those tours, I always say like I find Van Halen like Balance is like the best Alex Van Halen drum sound because it sounds like you're in the room with him, and the snare and the kick, like and on those last couple of tours, like it had that kind of sound. It had that like that SM57 like on the kick, and just like that poppy, that woody tone of the snare, like and that doom doom doom. As soon as you hear it, like you know what it is, and it sounded so good. And it's interesting that he used this snare like as like, you know, on the record and stuff like that, because you wouldn't think it would give you that sound, but it does.
It does. And there was no gaff tape on the heads, or, you know, I mean, it was a 57. So it's certainly it is in the tuning, because he wants a particular pitch.
So talk about the tuning a little bit. If I'm going to tune this, like, you know, like Al's Torque snare, for example, like what am I going to do to it?
Well,
copy paste generic answer.
I'll bite my tongue on that. which is like, no matter what you do, it's not going to sound like Alex Van Halen.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a benchmark. My benchmark on tour was the intro to Moby Dick on Zeppelin, so because that never changed, no matter what room I did, what kind of, whether I had stuffed up ears or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like that pitch it was my benchmark. And we would typically go, if I remember correctly, like a couple of cranks above that, just a bit. But that was a kind of a starting point, or like I say, a benchmark. Much like, if you're a guitar player, A440, we're tuning to A440. Okay, maybe with a drop D or whatever. But that was because I didn't use any kind of electronic tuners or anything like that. So I had to have something that never changed, and that was it. But it always kind of moved from that a little bit during sound check or whatever. Other than that, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, sometimes we'd use
was the bottom head was the bottom head looser than the top, or like was it even?
It's hard to tell because the top head was an Emperor X, which is super thick, and the bottom head is obviously really thin. Ambassador snare head. A lot of rumors go to Alex Van Halen uses a Ambassador batter head on the bottom. No, never. No. It was a normal snare drum head. Not super tight. No, it's more of a feel thing. It wasn't like a pitch. I don't know how to describe it other than that. And we used a 42 strand snare wires. And
did he ever tell you why like he chose to use so many snare wires on the snares? Is it a tone thing?
We never used a bottom snare mic.
No, never.
No.
So does having 42 strand snares on the bottom like affect the tone of the top?
Well, it's going to give you more snare action because there's twice as many wires vibrating against that bottom head, which I think is more critical when you don't have a bottom snare mic. And again, the snares weren't super tight because it would just choke the drum. It's kind of a feel thing of like the tension of the wires to the drum and there's so many different parameters on a drum of tension and tuning and what type of drum heads and all that business. And still at the end of the day, you're at the mercy of how the drummer hits it. And then you're at the mercy of the front of house engineer when you're playing in hockey arenas and stuff.
Yeah. I was just going to say, how important is EQ and compression to that snare drum sound? Because it must play a role. Yeah.
I mean, ideally they wouldn't use any of it, any EQ or we always try to get the source. That's what now just make that louder, put it in the room louder. Now there's when you're battling the acoustics of a hockey arena or whatever, stadiums and stuff, you gotta do what you gotta do to try to bring the drum to the masses at a Van Halen show.
And it's also the way he attacks
maximum volume.
Attacks the snare too. Like it's very rimmy. Like, and I always found it interesting how low he would sit and how high the snare would be. Like, it was almost like sort of in line with higher than
you could rest your chin. You could rest your chin on the snare drum.
Like it was always like I'd see photos of him and his hi-hat so high and like the snare, it would be like right there almost.
Yeah, I know. It's a trip. And he sits really low. And then, big kick drums and rack, it's
a sound. Yeah.
That's how he likes it. Yeah.
So to tune this floppy sort of bottom head, loose snares, and just crank the top to Moby Dick and crank it up just a little bit more.
That's what I think. If I remember right, that's what we did. Because that was like, like I said, that was kind of the benchmark kind of, we keep it in there. So, because a lot of times, over time of a tour, you get fatigued or whatever, things start getting out of whack. So you got to have something to bring you back to, like, okay, that's where we started, this reference thing over here. Look where we got, so I just did that on a daily basis to keep it in check.
What about like,
and then I would juggle snared. I would leapfrog snare drums. I would have 2 snare drums, in rotation, and keep the tuning between the two. It's
no interest. That's really interesting, because it's funny, because I have a lot of Van Halen nerds on my channel, and like they're gonna like listen to this and be like, John's lying.
Oh yeah, I've been accused of that.
Isn't that the best though? Because it's like, you go right to the source, and they're like, no, they have their fabricated one-liner answers, and like, no, like,
yeah. Oh yeah. So early on, because I am a drum geek, and I'm also a drum fan, and in particular an Alex Van Halen fan. And there was one time on some kind of Facebook thing where somebody was talking about Alex Van Halen snare drums, and somebody tagged me. This was back when I was on Facebook, before Aerosmith kind of blew me up. But so somebody tagged me and said, hey, I bet John Douglas could answer this question. And I came in, I thought, okay, these are a bunch of gearheads. It's like, I'll comment. And then I spoke my piece about, again, my experience with Al and the snare drum. And somebody basically said, no, that's wrong. I mean, literally. And I kind of went, my next comment was, okay, best, period. And I was out. It's like, because you can't argue with people like that.
No.
Where it's, it's,
you're not going to win.
What are you going to do? Yeah. I mean, so it's clearly, it's like, okay, this guy, and then a bunch of other people kind of pounced on him. But I didn't. And I was kind of like, okay, best. And I was out. That's
just kind of, like, from your perspective.
I don't think I've done it since, kind of public forum.
Yeah. Who used to do that a lot? Mutt Lange's engineer, Mike Shipley, he would go online, and he would, like, people would ask questions about, like, working with Def Leppard or Shania, and he'd talk about how they mix the snare or the kick or the hi-hats, and people would be like, no, that's not true. There's no way that's what you guys did. And he's like, no, I did. I mixed the record. I know what I did. Yeah. And they're like, no, that's not true. You're lying.
Yeah. And it's the same with, like, Hot for Teacher. That's the hotly debated, how did he do it? And no, I wasn't there. But most of the people that are on the internet claim, telling people how he did it or didn't do it, were also not there. And it's amazing how in all facets of the music business, but certainly drummers, where they just think that they know, and they will argue with their dying breath, even when somebody that was in the room, like Mike Shipley, and you still can't get through to these people. It's crazy.
But you know what? You got to love them, because they got conviction.
Hey. Yeah, and they're talking about it. So the music's still alive. It meant something. It means something to them. So knock yourself out.
Did Al, or like, did the front of house guy ever, like, throw on, like, any type of, like, chorusing effect or, like, anything on the overheads for the cymbals? Because I always loved how the cymbals sounded on those last couple of Van Halen tours. They just had this sort of, like, glossy, like, almost like, I describe it as like liquidy. Like, when you'd hit it, like, they would sound thick and they would sound fat, but they'd have, like, this decay that had a bit of, like, modulation to them or something. Could that have just been phasing between the mics, or?
I don't know. I mean,
I know that's a really geeky question, but
yeah, dude, you're a super geek. I was behind the cabinets. So, yeah. I mean, there were times during rehearsal or whatever, where I would go out front and kind of, check on the sound of something, just so that I could come back and make some changes or report to Al. And then sometimes he would have me play, and he would go out front and listen, because that's one thing that, he never gets a chance to, he's never heard Van Halen or, his drums. So, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would like to just say, well, that's just the magic of of Paiste 2002 cymbals, and I think that's certainly some of it. Beyond that, I couldn't tell you. You'd have to have the front of house guy on there or something.
Yeah, who was the front of house guy on those last tours?
Whew. I know we had Greg Price on one of them. I can't remember which one. We had Brad Maddox from Rush.
Oh yeah.
One of them. We had Oris. Can't remember Oris's last name.
And it's funny because you go into those shows and the drums just always sounded so good. Like, I gotta compliment you, like just everything. It's, of course, Al's a big part of it, but obviously you taking care of them day to day. I mean, you play a big part in that sound. Well, now here's maybe a controversial question, but when Tokyo Dome Live in Concert came out, what the heck happened with that recording? Why does everything sound so dull and flat compared to soundboards, or even just because if you go to the show, you hear Van Halen through the PA, sounds fantastic. That mix on that record is not what it should have sounded like.
I don't know the answer to that.
Because even from
next question.
I know, right?
I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
If it was all so easy, everything would be great all the time. I mean, it's kind of like if songwriting was so easy, then every song would be, Dream On or Walk This Way or Running with the Devil. I mean, it's I don't know the answer to that. It's out of my area of expertise and.
But I mean, if you go listen to the video you did showcasing the snare drum for the Ludwig YouTube channel, you hear that soundboard tape of Al's drum solo. It sounds amazing. It sounds fantastic. That sounds like, it was professionally mixed and everything. And then Tokyo Dome, everything sounds like it's a 2-track off the soundboard, bootleg. It doesn't make any sense.
It is counterintuitive. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
But they recorded every single show, right? So all those shows are sitting on a hard drive somewhere.
Yeah. That's to talk about a treasure trove, and we filmed a couple of shows. I know we filmed the Madison Square Garden and stuff like that. I don't know where any of that stuff is.
Full multicam, that was going to be a DVD kind of thing?
Yeah.
Huh. And then it all just
maybe even Tokyo Dome. I can't remember. So, a lot of stuff is documented that never sees the light of day. And I don't even know the reason. Because I'm, as I remind every band that I work for, eventually I'm like, well, I'm a fan too. I want to see it,
Yeah.
But who knows?
Was there anything special that Al liked having in his in-ears? Because Al's what I find interesting. Al was one of the first guys to ever use in-ear monitors. It's technically because of him. We have them.
Yes, correct. Jerry Harvey was their monitor engineer who pretty much invented in-ear monitors, and Al was the guinea pig.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, you are correct. His mix is pretty much Ed and vocal at times. But not all the time. So his mix is very minimal and very little drums because he's sitting in the middle of the drums. He doesn't get much back of it. Quite a bit of overheads, just like the whole kit. Now a lot of times you can't do that if the room is just too boomy. It's just it's swallowed in ambience.
Right.
But yeah. He grew up just listening to Ed. He used to have a 4x12 cabinet, in his ear, So yeah, literally. So, and then a PA to bring everything else to that level,
right
around him, like Texas headphones.
Crazy.
So, in-ears were a godsend to most of us, I think, to the whole live music industry, but particularly to drummers. But the damage is done from years of having a 4x12.
Well, then you have that's why you got to get the custom in-ear monitors, How much of an impact does venue have on a drum kit sound, for example? I mean, does it really play a huge part in tuning, for example? Are you going to tune toms a little higher in a bigger room to pop through the mix, or?
Well, that's certainly one thing I learned from Alex Van Halen was exactly that. Was his toms. Everybody talks about his snare tuning, but I'm like, well, no, I think now while that's important, it's his toms that how they're tuned a lot higher than you would think, and therefore they do cut through the mix, and you get a nice delineation between 12, 13, 16. It's not just thud thud thud,
Right.
and so I did learn that. I learned a lot from him, but that in particular was kind of a revelation, if you will. When I go see a band play Van Halen, or like a Van Halen tribute band, and that everybody's so concerned about the snare drum, as they should be, but they forget about the toms, and the toms are like low and thuddy, and I'm like, yeah, that's not that, and I think that's part of his sound too, because part of his snare sound, because the kit as a whole is an instrument. It's not a snare drum and a rack tom. It's a drum kit, like a grand piano is an instrument. So the whole drum kit is an instrument. So even though you're close miking the snare drum, all the toms are resonating when he hits that snare drum, especially the 12 and 13. They're right there in that magic vortex, and how those are tuned absolutely is picked up by that snare mic. And the toms are tuned really high, and they cut through and they resonate. And when you hear him play the toms, you go, yeah, that's also a signature sound, in my opinion. Everybody just focuses on the snare, but the toms are crucial to the sound of Alex Van Halen in those Van Halen records.
How would you tune the toms? Like tight on top, loose on bottom? Were they like matching? Or was it about feel?
Typically, the bottom head, because it's thinner, like we have coated emperors on top and then clear ambassador on the bottom. So you're basically talking about the head is more or less twice as thick on top. So they almost can never be tuned the same because they resonate at different frequencies. So the bottom head is tuned up about a third higher than the batter head. So, and that's the way it is across the board. To get that sound, and I talk about in-ears. I rely on in-ears for my tuning, during the day, not only to block out the noise of an arena and everybody else, but I want to tune it for what the microphone is listening to, because that's what everybody else is going to hear. It's not going to. It's nobody else. Nobody else is on stage, so I tune through the microphone into the in-ears to really zero in on frequencies and fine tuning, especially the rack tom. Well, all the drums, snare included, because I want to tune it for what the mic hears, because certain microphones pick up certain frequencies and stuff. So I want to know that.
Right.
So it's very, very useful.
I mean, if you're using like an AE 3000 on a tom versus like a 421, like it's going to give you two totally different results.
Yeah. And the room you're in is going to give you different results, and on and on and on. So I do the same thing as a player. It's like I tune with my put my in-ears in and fine tune them the frequencies.
An all new episode of The Jeremy White Show,
available wherever you stream.